A little girl in a yellow dress stopped a billionaire CEO outside his car and asked, "Are you my dad?" He almost said no until she added, "I lost my memory." What he did next changed both of their lives forever. Christian Miller stepped out of the tall glass doors of his corporate headquarters into the golden afternoon sun, his light blue suit, crisp, shoes polished, and briefcase in hand. His driver waited beside the black sedan parked along the curb, the engine running and the door already open for him. Christian was headed to the airport for a high-profile international conference, the kind of event where one deal could shift the trajectory of an entire industry. His schedule was packed, his mind already on the speech he would deliver in Geneva, the handshakes, the press. Every minute counted. He descended the front steps quickly, his movements smooth and precise, when something stopped him. It wasn't the sound of traffic or a ringing phone, it was the quiet, broken sound of someone crying. Barely audible, but enough to make him pause. He turned his head, eyes scanning the sidewalk near his car, and then he saw her. A little girl stood near the passenger side door, no more than 6 years old. Her yellow dress was dusty, her blue denim jacket too thin for the late afternoon breeze. Her blonde hair was slightly wavy, tangled in places, and her wide blue eyes shimmered with tears that had yet to fall completely. She wasn't moving or speaking, just staring at his car like she was waiting for someone to step out of it. At first, Christian assumed she was lost, maybe separated from a parent or part of a school group nearby. He looked around instinctively, searching for an adult, but the sidewalk was otherwise empty. No one seemed to notice her, no one seemed to care, and that struck him. She looked so utterly alone. He hesitated only a moment before stepping toward her. As he neared, she looked up at him, not with fear, but with something far more devastating: hope. "Sir, I lost my memory. Are you my dad by any chance?" she asked, her voice small and unsure, as if even she wasn't certain whether she believed what she was saying. Christian froze mid-step. It wasn't the question itself that stunned him, but the sincerity in her voice, the desperation buried beneath it. It wasn't some childish game. There was pain there, real confusion, real fear. He crouched slowly in front of her, his expression softening despite the storm of questions already swirling in his mind. She looked directly into his eyes, and something about the way she did it, so open, so trusting, cut through every layer of logic he had. For a moment, the world around them faded. The car, the airport, the importance of his schedule. All that remained was this fragile human question from a little girl with no name and nowhere to go. He didn't know why he said what he did next. It wasn't rational, it wasn't planned, but it was immediate, from somewhere deeper than reason. "No," he said gently, "but I think I just became him." And in that moment, everything in Christian's life began to change. Christian didn't return to his car that afternoon. Instead, he called his driver and told him to cancel the airport drop-off, reschedule the flight, and hold all further calls unless it was urgent. His assistant's voice on the other end was panicked, reminding him that the Geneva appearance had been booked months in advance, that the press was expecting him, that investors would be watching. But Christian barely heard her. The only thing he could focus on was the little girl sitting quietly in the back of his office, wrapped in one of the building's emergency blankets, her small hands holding a cup of warm tea too big for her fingers. He had brought her up through the private elevator, avoiding the lobby traffic, and settled her into the executive lounge normally reserved for board members and international clients. It was sterile, corporate, filled with cold art and sleek furniture, but it was safe and quiet. She hadn't said much after their first exchange. She followed him without protest, her trust both heartbreaking and terrifying. After a few minutes of silence, he sat across from her and tried again. "Do you remember anything else? Your name, where you live, anyone you know?" She shook her head slowly. "I woke up on a bench near a fountain. There were people walking by, but I didn't know any of them. My head hurt. Then I saw your car and thought, maybe." Christian tried to keep his expression calm, but every word hit him like a weight. He contacted the police and filed an official report. A social worker was dispatched to the building, along with a medical team. While they examined her, Christian stood back, arms crossed, his mind racing. How does a child just appear? How does a girl this small end up alone, disoriented and clearly traumatized without anyone noticing? The medical evaluation showed no signs of injury, no visible trauma. Physically, she was healthy, but her memory loss was concerning. The psychologist, a kind middle-aged woman named Dr. Vargas, explained that the girl was likely suffering from dissociative amnesia, typically triggered by extreme stress or trauma. The mind has a way of protecting itself, she said. When something is too painful or terrifying, the brain can shut off access to certain memories as a form of defense. Christian listened carefully, absorbing every word, but his eyes kept drifting back to the girl. She sat quietly now, swinging her legs slightly as she stared at a painting on the far wall. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't fidgety. She simply existed in the room, like someone who had been drifting alone for a long time and had finally landed somewhere still. The authorities told Christian they would begin checking missing child reports and family databases immediately. In the meantime, the girl would need temporary housing, foster placement could take time, and shelters were not equipped for her situation. Christian didn't even wait for them to finish the sentence. "She stays with me," he said firmly, "for now, until we know who she is." The social worker raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Miller, I'm aware of the legal protocols. I have resources, staff, and a fully secured property. She won't be at risk, and she doesn't need to feel like a case number in a system, not now." After some discussion, the agency agreed to a temporary emergency placement under Christian's guardianship. They would conduct a home visit, run background checks, and keep in regular contact, but for now she was allowed to leave with him. That evening Christian drove her himself, no chauffeur, just the two of them in the quiet car as the sun dipped low behind the skyline. She looked out the window with a soft, thoughtful expression. When they pulled into the gated entrance of his home, her eyes widened, but she didn't say anything. He carried her small overnight bag provided hastily by the agency and showed her the guest room, which was more luxurious than most five-star hotels. But when he asked if she wanted to sleep there, she shook her head. "It's too quiet," she whispered. So he set up a small mattress on the floor in his home office, close to where he worked late nights. She curled up under a soft throw blanket and fell asleep within minutes. Before he turned off the light, Christian watched her chest rise and fall in steady rhythm. She still hadn't told him her name, and strangely, he hadn't asked again. There was something unspoken between them, something neither of them had the words for yet. As he stood in the doorway, the girl stirred slightly and murmured, almost inaudibly, "Will you still be here when I wake up?" Christian's throat tightened. "Yes," he said quietly, "I will." Christian's days, once tightly structured and defined by the relentless momentum of corporate life, had taken on a new and unpredictable rhythm. His morning briefings, global video calls, and investor strategy meetings still existed. But now they were interrupted by softer, stranger moments, searching for a lost sock in the laundry room, slicing apples into thin wedges for a small girl who insisted on no skin, or reading the same bedtime story 3 times in a row because she kept asking, "One more." The girl still didn't remember her name, or where she came from, and Christian didn't push. The police had turned up nothing so far, no matches in the missing child databases, no one stepping forward. She remained a mystery, a small, wide-eyed enigma who moved through his world with quiet observation and growing curiosity. He had started calling her Lily. It came naturally, as if the name had found him rather than the other way around. He mentioned it once, gently, after she helped him feed the koi fish in the backyard pond, and when she responded without hesitation, the name stuck. She seemed to like it. She never questioned it, and each time he said it, something warm stirred in him, something protective, something grounding. What unsettled him, however, was how quickly Lily began to adapt to his life. She was not like other children he had encountered. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for toys or throw tantrums or whine when things didn't go her way. She watched everything with calm, intelligent eyes. She asked questions about things most children ignored: how his car's engine worked, why elevators needed counterweights, what made the moon move across the sky. Once, while walking through his home office, she stopped in front of a technical schematic on the wall, a detailed cross-section of an experimental turbine his company was developing. "That part will overheat if you run it too long," she said, pointing at a specific node in the drawing. Christian had blinked in surprise. "What makes you say that?" She shrugged. "It looks too thin, the heat won't move away fast enough, I think it would crack." He stared at her. His engineering team had spent months debating that exact concern. The final design hadn't addressed it fully yet, but how could a 6-year-old girl with no memory know that? Christian began noticing other strange moments like that. She could read adult-level science books, though she sometimes asked what common words meant. She assembled a 500-piece puzzle upside down, using only the shapes and not the images. She could recall the order of his meetings more reliably than his assistant. but ask her what she ate for lunch yesterday, and she'd pause and say, "I don't know." He started documenting these moments, not because he was trying to test her, but because he needed to make sense of what was happening. He had dealt with prodigies before, children of extraordinary intellect, fostered through private programs and elite academies, but this was different. Lily didn't behave like a trained genius. She behaved like someone who knew things she didn't understand. She knew, like her brain held data it hadn't chosen. He consulted with more specialists, discreetly, neurologists, memory experts, trauma counselors. None could offer a clear explanation. They agreed on one thing. Lily's mind was a maze of locked doors, and something had slammed them shut. Whether they would ever open again was impossible to predict. Despite all the mystery, Lily began to smile more. She followed Christian from room to room, sometimes just to sit in silence near him as he worked. She spoke in gentle tones, never interrupting but always asking the kinds of questions that made him stop what he was doing and actually think. He started spending more time at home, not just out of concern, but because her presence was slowly rewiring the pace of his life. His house, once a cold, immaculate fortress of glass and steel, began to feel like a place someone lived in. One night, he found her in the kitchen, drawing on a napkin with a black pen. She had sketched a building, boxy, concrete, with a strange number of small windows and a tall fence. He asked what it was. She frowned, stared at it for a long time, then said, "I think I dreamed it." Christian took the napkin and scanned it later, running an image search just to be thorough. It turned up nothing, but something about it unsettled him deeply. It didn't look like a house. It looked institutional. He didn't say anything to her, but he saved the drawing. That night, as he lay awake in bed, Christian realized that his feelings toward Lily had shifted from obligation to something far deeper. He had brought her in because she needed help, but now she wasn't just a responsibility. She was becoming part of his life, part of his thoughts, woven into the spaces that had once belonged to solitude and silence. It scared him, not because he didn't want it, but because he did. She had no past, he had no family, and yet, somehow, their broken pieces had begun to fit together. He turned off the light, knowing he wouldn't sleep. Somewhere in the quiet of his house, Lily was asleep, trusting that when she woke up he'd still be there. And he would be, no matter what. The nightmares started quietly, like whispers behind closed doors. At first, Christian thought they were just the natural aftermath of trauma. Lily would shift in her sleep, mumble a few unintelligible words, and fall still again, but soon the words began to form, sentences, names, pleas. Sometimes she cried out. Other times, she whimpered phrases that made Christian sit upright in the dark, heart pounding. He started writing them down in a notebook he kept beside his bed. "Don't lock the door," she said, not to scream. "It's too bright in the hallway." They took the quiet girl away. The phrases were fragmented, out of order, like puzzle pieces dumped on the floor with no reference image. Christian didn't show them to anyone at first. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. But he felt in his gut that these weren't just dreams. They were memories trying to claw their way back. One night, Lily woke up screaming. Christian rushed into the guest room. She refused to move back into the larger, quieter bedroom he'd prepared, and found her sitting upright, tears streaming down her cheeks, clutching the blanket to her chest. "It was the room again," she whispered when he sat beside her, "with the humming." "Humming?" he asked gently. She nodded, wiping her face with the sleeve of her pajama shirt. "There was always humming in the wall, I think from machines, and cold air, and lights that never turned off." He didn't ask more that night. He just sat with her until she fell asleep again, her small hand resting on his. But when he returned to his own room, he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that wrapped around his chest like a vice. Whatever Lily had been through hadn't just been traumatic, it had been unnatural. The next morning, Christian made a decision. He called a private investigator, not one of the corporate ones he used for background checks and internal security, but someone different. Her name was Dana Locke, a former federal agent who now took on cases involving missing persons and institutional cover-ups. When she arrived at the house, Christian didn't mince words. He explained Lily's appearance, her amnesia, the lack of any identifying matches in databases, and the strange dreams. He showed her the napkin drawing and the list of phrases. Dana listened carefully, asked very few questions, and then said, "If she came from somewhere they don't want her found, they made sure of that. But even ghosts leave shadows." She began her search immediately. Meanwhile, Lily's behavior started to shift. She grew more cautious during the day, occasionally pausing mid-sentence as if catching herself from saying something she shouldn't. Christian noticed that she began avoiding certain sounds: buzzing lights, the microwave beep, the sound of heavy doors closing. Once, while visiting his office building, she flinched visibly at the sight of a security camera. He didn't mention it, but he took note. Every small reaction was a breadcrumb. About 2 weeks later, Dana returned with something. She had combed through closed facilities, private clinics, orphanages, and off-the-record child programs that had been quietly shut down for various reasons. Most had nothing to offer, but one caught her attention: a privately funded child development center in upstate New York, destroyed in a fire 5 years ago. No official death toll was ever confirmed. The story had barely made the local news. According to what records Dana could find, the facility had been known for accelerated learning studies on orphaned or state-released children. It was called the Halden Project. Christian read the reports in silence, hands tightening with every page. The place had been disguised as a boarding school for gifted youth, but deeper investigation revealed it operated more like a behavioral lab. Children were subjected to environmental testing, prolonged isolation, light manipulation, memory reinforcement protocols. In some cases, early-stage pharmaceutical treatments. The staff names were redacted. Funding was traced to a front company that no longer existed. The building had burned down. According to the file, all children were presumed dead. No survivors listed, no bodies identified. Christian placed the napkin drawing Lily had made next to a photo Dana had recovered of the Halden facility. The resemblance was exact: the fence, the proportions. She hadn't dreamed it. She had remembered it. That night, he didn't tell Lily what he had learned. She had just begun to smile again, to laugh without hesitation, to sleep more soundly after weeks of unrest. But Christian knew the day was coming when the past would knock on the door. They had both hoped would stay closed. And when it did, he would be ready. Because no matter who she was, no matter where she came from, he had already made a silent vow the moment she looked up at him and asked if he was her father. He was. And he wasn't going to let the past take her away. Christian sat in his office late one evening, long after the house had gone quiet. The only sound was the soft ticking of the antique wall clock and the occasional creak of old wood under the walls. Lily had gone to sleep hours ago, her stuffed rabbit tucked safely under one arm, the other loosely curled around her blanket. She hadn't had a nightmare in several days, which felt like a small miracle, but Christian's mind couldn't rest. The file on his desk glared up at him, like a wound still bleeding: images of the Halden facility, a map of the fire damage, the fake corporate names tied to its funding, and a scanned copy of the building's original floor plan. Lily had drawn that layout from memory. He kept returning to the same question: how had she gotten out? If the fire had destroyed everything, if no one had been reported missing, how had she survived? Who had helped her? The official reports were riddled with gaps. The staff had disappeared after the incident, the owners had claimed no knowledge of internal operations, and every trace of the Halden project had been buried. If Dana hadn't dug so deeply, it would have remained forgotten, as if the children inside had never existed. But Lily had existed, and somehow she had escaped. Christian's hand hovered over the phone for a moment before he picked it up and dialed Dana. She answered on the second ring. He didn't bother with greetings. "I need you to find out how she got out of that building. I need to know who else was there." Dana hesitated, then said, "I've been working on that. There's one survivor, not a child, an employee, a night nurse. She never testified, no record of her in the final reports. I only found her because she filed a quiet workers' comp claim for smoke inhalation 2 months after the fire. Then she vanished. Where is she now? I think she's in Ohio, changed her name. She's using an alias, but I have a lead. Give me a few days." Christian exhaled slowly. Find her. The following week passed in a strange fog. Christian maintained the illusion of normalcy for Lily's sake, helped her with puzzles, made breakfast, took her to the library, watched her bounce through the halls like a child discovering the world for the first time. But inside, he felt the storm building. He couldn't tell her what he knew, not yet, not until he was sure. She was happy, in a fragile, cautious way. Every small moment of trust she gave him was a gift he refused to betray. Then, on a rainy Thursday morning, Dana called again. Her voice was different this time, calmer, but edged with something urgent. "I found her. Her name is Evelyn Maris now. She lives in a small town just outside of Columbus. She agreed to meet. She remembered Lily, she said. She never forgot her. Christian flew out the same day. No press, no assistant, just a borrowed jacket and a baseball cap, traveling like a man with no name. The meeting was arranged in a modest diner on the edge of town. Evelyn arrived early. She was in her 50s, worn down by life, her hair grayer than it should have been, her eyes cautious but sharp. When Christian introduced himself and showed her Lily's recent photo, Evelyn covered her mouth and began to cry. She was the quiet one, she said, never caused trouble, always drawing. She didn't talk much, but she watched everything, like she knew things we didn't. Evelyn told him about Halden. About the program that ran behind locked doors, disguised as educational development, but structured more like a behavioral lab. Children weren't taught, they were studied. Memory games were used as tests, not lessons. There were no field trips, no holidays, no parents, just endless routine, controlled diets, observation rooms. Some children cracked, others went silent. Lily had stayed strong until the fire. Evelyn hadn't started it, but she had seen who did. An older girl, maybe 10 or 11, had found a way to start a fire in the supply wing. She had set it deliberately, using stolen chemicals from a maintenance room. Evelyn never knew her name, only that she whispered to Lily constantly and seemed to be the only one Lily truly trusted. The girl had pulled Lily from her bed that night, told her to run, and pushed her out through a service tunnel while the flames spread. She saved her, Evelyn said, voice trembling. She didn't make it out herself. Christian sat frozen, his fingers curled around his coffee cup. You're sure? Evelyn nodded. I saw them. I helped lift the hatch. I was too afraid to leave, but that girl, she was brave, she said. If she forgets, tell her she mattered. Christian couldn't speak. For a long time, neither of them did. When he finally returned home, it was already dark. Lily was asleep on the couch, curled under a blanket, a drawing clutched in her hand. He picked it up carefully. It was the building again. But this time next to it, she had drawn a second figure, a girl, older, with long hair and kind eyes. On the bottom, in shaky block letters, Lily had written, "She helped me, *E. Christian sat beside her, brushing her hair from her forehead. He didn't wake her. He just watched her sleep, thinking of the girl who had sacrificed herself for someone smaller, quieter, more fragile, and wondering if that kind of courage was something that lived on in the ones who were saved. He didn't know if Lily would ever remember everything, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was never alone that night. And now, she never would be again. The air in the house felt different after Christian returned from Ohio, heavier somehow, filled with something invisible yet unmistakably present. He hadn't told Lily about the woman he had met, or the truth she had revealed about the fire, the girl who had saved her, the underground tunnel, the unspoken trauma hidden beneath years of silence. He wasn't sure if Lily was ready to hear it, or if she even needed to. She was still just a child, with delicate fingers and soft dreams, and a mind trying to rebuild itself from the ashes of a past it had every right to forget. But Christian couldn't forget. Not anymore. He stayed up late that night, sitting at the long kitchen table with a cup of untouched tea, staring out the window into the dark backyard where the garden lights glowed faintly beneath the trees. His thoughts circled around the nameless girl Evelyn had described, the one who had led Lily out. She wasn't in any report. She hadn't been recorded as a casualty. She had simply vanished with the fire. But she had existed. Christian believed that now with complete certainty. A ghost child, erased by those who created the Halden Project, who died nameless so another could live. He couldn't help wondering if Lily remembered her in fragments. Maybe that's who she was drawing. Maybe that's who she whispered to in her sleep. Maybe that voice in the back of her head, the one that urged her to be quiet, to observe, to keep secrets, wasn't just trauma, it was memory. Alive in pieces, scattered across her growing mind like pages torn from a book and shuffled by the wind. The next morning, Christian found Lily in the living room, lying on her stomach with a pencil in her hand and several sheets of white paper spread out in front of her. She looked up as he entered, eyes wide and alert. "I think I saw her again," she said softly, as though sharing a dream. "Who?" he asked gently, kneeling beside her. "The girl from the tunnel," she answered. "I didn't remember her name, but I remember her voice now. She told me not to cry. She said she'd go back and distract them." Christian's breath caught. He sat quietly as Lily began to draw again, this time, not just the building or the room. She drew the tunnel. She drew pipes along the wall, a ladder, the square metal hatch. and two girls, one younger, being pulled forward and one older, with her hand extended behind her as if shielding the path. "I think she was my sister," Lily whispered. He didn't ask how she knew. There was no need. Some truths live deeper than logic. He let her draw, let her remember in her own way, and when she finally stopped, he folded the papers and placed them in a file marked with her name. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Christian sat in his office and stared at the growing collection of evidence, memories, and questions. He called Dana again and asked her to search for any trace of missing girls matching that vague description. Older, brown hair, tall for her age, unaccounted for during or after the Holden fire. He didn't know what he hoped to find. Maybe nothing, maybe a record buried in a forgotten file, or maybe just peace in trying. Meanwhile, life at home began to feel strangely normal again. Lily returned to her routines, books in the morning, puzzles in the afternoon, drawing before bed. But now, she was opening up more. She laughed more freely. She began asking about the world, not just how things worked, but what they meant. She asked Christian about his childhood, about what scared him when he was her age, about whether he ever felt like he didn't belong. He answered honestly, sometimes reluctantly. He told her about growing up in a house full of silence, about the pressure to succeed, about how he'd lost sight of what life was meant to feel like somewhere along the way. And Lily listened without judgment, nodding like someone far older than her years, as if she understood what loneliness really looked like even when it wore a suit and held a briefcase. In the quiet evenings, Christian started to write. Not memos, not emails, letters addressed to no one and everyone. Letters to the girl in the tunnel. Letters to the boy he used to be. Letters to Lily's future self, hoping she would never need to read them but knowing she might. He kept them in a drawer by his desk, a secret record of the life they were building. Then, one morning, a letter arrived at the house. There was no return address. The envelope was old and creased, the ink slightly faded. Christian opened it at the kitchen table, heart already pounding because somehow he knew this would be different. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was careful, almost hesitant, but steady. The letter was short. "I saw her make it out. I saw her run. I never told anyone because I couldn't risk them finding her again. I think about her every day. If she's alive, tell her she matters. Tell her she wasn't the only one who forgot who she was. Some of us were forced to forget on purpose. I'm not signing this, because names can still be dangerous. But I remember her, and I remember the girl who gave her freedom." Christian read the letter 3 times before he looked up. He didn't know how it had found them, but it had. And it confirmed what he already suspected. They were more like Lily, forgotten children with stolen memories, scattered across the world, waiting to feel safe again. He didn't tell Lily about the letter that day. Instead, he made her pancakes shaped like stars and asked if she wanted to paint in the garden. She nodded, smiling, and ran to get her brushes. The past had sent a message, but today was for color, for sunlight, for building something strong enough to hold them both. Tomorrow, they would open another door, together. Spring arrived gently that year, as if nature itself understood that the household had already endured too much winter. The air grew softer, the mornings brighter, and the garden in the backyard began to bloom with subtle bursts of color, tulips pushing through the soil, buds forming on the trees, and the gentle hum of bees returning to their quiet work. Christian found himself spending more time outside, watching Lily run barefoot through the grass, her hair longer now, her laughter more frequent. She had begun to hum to herself again, something she hadn't done in the early days. There was still a stillness in her, something careful and self-aware, but the fear that once lingered in her gaze was retreating. Slowly, she was beginning to live. Christian had hired a new counselor for her, not because she needed fixing, but because she deserved someone who could guide her without intrusion. Her name was Hazel, and she was nothing like the clinical psychologist they had seen before. She didn't treat Lily like a case or a broken code that needed deciphering. She spoke softly, asked questions with patience, and didn't flinch when Lily didn't answer. She brought art supplies instead of notebooks. She let Lily talk about dreams instead of memories, and most of all, she didn't push. She waited, and Lily, sensing something safe in her presence, began to open. Hazel had a quiet intelligence about her, measured but kind, composed but never cold. Christian found himself drawn to her, not in some rushed, romantic sense, but slowly, as if realizing one day that someone had become essential without ever trying to be. She began staying longer after sessions, first for tea, then for dinner, and then once or twice because Lily had asked her to. Christian didn't question it, neither did Lily. It was as though Hazel had always been meant to fill a space they didn't know was empty. On one of those soft April evenings, Lily sat cross-legged on the patio, painting a picture of the sky, while Hazel watched her quietly. Christian brought out glasses of lemonade, set them on the table, and took the seat beside them. "She says she dreams of a big window," Hazel said quietly. "One that looks out into trees, not walls. She says it feels real, but she doesn't think it happened yet." Christian nodded, his gaze drifting to Lily, who was now adding small stars to her sky even though it was still daylight. "Maybe she's imagining a future." Hazel smiled gently. "Maybe she's remembering the one she wants." Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep and the dishes had been put away, Hazel stood by the doorway, ready to leave, when Christian spoke. "You've done more for her than you realize," he said. "You helped her feel human again." Hazel looked at him for a long moment before replying. "She always was human, Christian. She just needed someone to stop treating her like evidence of something broken." He nodded, his voice softer now. "And what about me? What do you think I needed?" She stepped forward, closer, her expression warmer than he'd seen before. "Maybe just someone to remind you that loving doesn't mean losing." They didn't kiss that night. There was no dramatic pause, no cliché music in the background. Just the quiet understanding that something real was building between them. Slow, steady, honest. It was a few weeks later, on Lily's birthday, that everything changed again. She had asked for a small gathering, just the three of them, pancakes for dinner, and a campfire in the backyard where she could toast marshmallows and tell ghost stories that weren't scary at all. Christian had strung lights along the trees, Hazel brought hand-drawn cards, and Lily wore a paper crown made from a cereal box. After dinner, as they sat around the small fire, Lily turned to Hazel and asked, "Can I call you something?" Hazel tilted her head. "Of course, what is it?" Lily hesitated. Then, very quietly she said, "Can I call you Mom?" Hazel's eyes welled instantly, but she didn't rush to respond. She leaned forward, took Lily's hand and said, "Only if that's what you want, and if you ever want to change your mind, I'll understand." Lily didn't answer. She just leaned against Hazel's shoulder and stayed there until the fire died down. Later that night, Christian and Hazel stood in the kitchen, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the only sound between them. "She called you Mom," he said, almost in awe. Hazel nodded. "I wasn't expecting it." "I was," he said, turning to face her. "She's always known who her people are, even when the rest of the world failed her." Hazel watched him for a moment, searching his face. "She's not the only one," she said. Christian reached into the drawer by the sink and pulled out a small velvet box. He had kept it for months, unsure of when the moment would be right, unsure if there would ever be his right time after all the wrongs they'd endured. But tonight, the firelight still warm in their memory, the name, Mom, still echoing in the walls he knew. He opened the box slowly, revealing a simple silver ring with a small sapphire in the center. "I'm not asking for perfect," he said, "and I'm not asking you to fix anything. I just want to build something new, with you, with her, together." Hazel didn't cry. She just nodded, then stepped forward and kissed him with a kind of quiet certainty that didn't need to be explained. The house was still. Lily slept peacefully in the room next door. And for the first time in years, Christian felt that home wasn't a place, it was a person, maybe two, maybe three. Years later, when people asked how it all began, Christian never told them the version that made headlines. He didn't mention the boardroom he walked out of, the international flight he missed, or the billion-dollar meetings that were pushed aside the day a 6-year-old girl in a yellow dress looked up at him and asked, "Are you my dad?" Those things didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what came after the parts. No one could script or plan, the parts built quietly, like a bridge laid stone by stone, across a gap no one had seen until it was crossed. Lily had grown. She was 12 now, tall for her age, still sharp-eyed and observant, but no longer guarded. Her hair was longer, often tied back in a braid, and her voice had taken on a quiet confidence. She still loved the stars and drawing buildings she remembered only in fragments, but now she played piano and asked about history and read books that made even Christian feel slightly outpaced. Her nightmares had become rare, fewer and farther between, and when they came, she no longer screamed. She simply crawled into bed between him and Hazel, curled up like she used to when she was small, and went back to sleep knowing they'd still be there in the morning. Hazel had stayed, not just in the house but in every part of their lives. She and Christian were married on a foggy autumn morning in a small clearing behind their home. No press, no announcements, just Lily holding both their hands, beaming like she'd kept a secret that had finally come true. Hazel continued her work as a counselor, but now specialized in children like Lily kids, with gaps in their stories, invisible bruises in their memories, voices that were too quiet for most to hear. She said very little about her clients at home, but sometimes, when Christian passed her study in the evening, he would see her writing letters to families, drawing simple charts, or quietly crying alone because some things still hurt even after they've healed. Christian had changed too. He still ran his company but from a different perspective. He let go of the constant pursuit of scale and instead focused on ethics, on mentorship, on programs that could lift others up instead of leaving them behind. He started a foundation for children with lost records, helped rebuild schools in rural towns, and funded new research into memory trauma. But at home, he was simply Dad, the man who burned toast every Saturday morning, who forgot picture day, who told the worst jokes but laughed the hardest at them. One late spring evening, as the sky darkened into a rich soft blue and the first stars blinked into view, the family sat together on the back porch. It had become a ritual: tea for Hazel, coffee for Christian, hot chocolate for Lily, even in warm weather. They didn't talk much on those evenings, they just watched the sky, waited for the moon, and listened to the quiet comfort of belonging. That night, Lily handed Christian a notebook she'd been working on. On the cover, written in large, careful letters, were the words, "My Real Life." He opened it, expecting sketches, but found pages filled with writing her memories, her dreams, fragments of the past she could now remember, and the ones she had decided to leave behind. There were pages about Hazel, about school, about the first day she called him Dad. And then there was a single sentence written in blue ink, centered on a page by itself. "I got lost and found myself again in the space where someone stayed." Christian's throat tightened. He closed the notebook gently and looked at her. "Do you feel like you found your place?" he asked. Lily nodded. "I don't remember everything, I don't think I want to, but I remember enough. I remember love, and that's more than I had before." He reached over and wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Hazel leaned in from the other side, resting her head on his shoulder. The three of them sat like that in silence as night closed in around them. At the edge of the garden, fireflies began to blink. The air was full of soft light and memory, and the steady, unshakable rhythm of a home that had been built not from perfection, but from presence. And somewhere deep in Christian's heart, he thought back to that moment years ago, on the sidewalk, outside his car, when everything had still been unknown, and realized something simple and beautiful. He hadn't saved her, he had saved him, and now, at last, they were both free. The ending of this story, to me, is not about closure. It's about transformation. It doesn't wrap everything up with a perfect bow, because real healing rarely does. Instead, it shows what happens when someone chooses to stay not out of obligation, but out of love. Christian didn't rescue Lily in the traditional sense. He listened, he believed her, he made room in his life where there had been none. That kind of love, the patient, day after day kind, is what truly rewrote both of their lives. What strikes me most is that the story never forgets its roots in trauma. It acknowledges memory loss, fear, and institutional betrayal, not to dwell in darkness, but to show how resilience can grow from it. Lily is not a symbol, she's a person, complicated, brilliant, hurt, and healing. And the twist, really, is that while Christian thought he was giving her a home, she was giving him something far rarer: purpose, family, the permission to feel again. This story ends with light, not because everything is fixed, but because everything is real, and real, even when messy, is the most beautiful ending anyone could ask for.